Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thank you for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Jan Vermut, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Scott Burleson and Jonathan Edwards. Today, we welcome our very special guest and my business partner and friend for more than 10 years, Beat Walther. Beat started out his career at P&G, he's worked at McKinsey, and he's managing partner at VentBridge, so the agency I work at, and which he co-founded 20 years ago. He's a co-creator of the CFI approach, and CFI stands for Customer-Focused Innovation, an approach which helps companies focus their innovation resources on the winning ideas. Beyond his work at VentBridge, he's a board member and has coached more than 200 startups, but I believe that might even be a bigger number. I don't know. We'll see later on. Beat, anyway, thank you so much for joining us on the Product Quest podcast.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to be here on this great initiative.
Great to have you. Well, it has been a fun initiative, I must say. So we're very pleased to have you on here. I mentioned VentBridge. So VentBridge as the agency, and it's something like a 20-year success story. So maybe could you start a little bit telling us about VentBridge, what it is, how did it come about?
Well, VentBridge we are now at VentBridge 4.0, I would say. And VentBridge 1.0 was not on innovation, was not on strategy. It was really a time in 2003 when, remember that the internet bubble burst in 2001, 2, 3, around this. I had a concept on startups before, a consulting concept on startups before, and then suddenly this bubble burst, and I met a business partner at the time who wanted to do business development, or his concept was rent a sales force. And this was really a very interesting idea for the time, because consulting was really not really at demand. It was about creating value in sales. It was about IT companies before 2003. They were just sitting in the office and picking up because one wanted to do all these fantastic IT projects, and then there was this millennium change, and suddenly everything stopped. And we started VentBridge 1.0 with the idea of bridging the salespeople and helping the salespeople to do strategic conceptual selling, proactive selling, and that was also that gave us also the name VentBridge. Vend is from vending machine, or vendre in French, and so bridge was this idea.
Yeah.
And we started very well. We had some great projects at the beginning. It was not a consulting format. It was a retainer and success fee format at the time. And then suddenly we had larger clients. I mean, at the time, for example, suddenly we had UBS as a client, the bank. And we helped them to do conceptual selling. And we realized that these teams did not understand their customer.
Yeah.
And that was like an aha moment for us to say, they do selling, they do conceptual selling, and they don't understand the problems of their customer. Of course, they were saying, yes, I know my customer very well. I go play golf. But okay, now you know he plays golf or she plays golf, but you don't know the problems, you don't know the pain points of this customer. This we realized, and then we created VentBridge 2.0, which was really about identifying customer needs with another partner. Maybe we can talk about this later on in a separate discussion, because this was really 1.0 20 years ago, business development, sales development, and that phase lasted from 2003 till 2006, 2005, 2006, 2007 maybe.
Yeah. I mean, then you said you kind of reinvented VentBridge almost. So there's different versions of VentBridge that have been there, and maybe we can discuss this point. So at one point, you got more into, let's say, innovation, or at least also more formally into touch with jobs to be done. I mean, it's something we haven't mentioned yet, but I think we should, because at least if I understand or remember this correctly, it's around this time where you got in touch, at least for the first couple of times, with this label of jobs to be done, if I'm correct.
Yes, that's 2005, where I, for the first time, heard the term jobs to be done. 2005, I was meeting another partner, business partner, Roger, and he.
Oh, I know him very well.
You know him very well, yeah. And I read the innovative solution from Clayton Christensen and say, hey, what you're doing is really great. And it seems to me there is a link to Clayton Christensen, and in there he talks about get the job done, chapter 3. And Roger said, yeah, that's what we do. But no one was talking about jobs to be done at the time. But Clayton was really the one who brought in jobs to be done into innovation. I believe, from what I know. Now, we found out later that it has already been around earlier. There was Ted Levitt in the 60s describing the same concept. There was Peter Drucker coining the name job done or something. But in any way, and then I realized that in Procter times, we were doing jobs to be done without having a name for it. Very interesting anecdote.
Please. Can you tell? I mean, what does this mean, and what does jobs to be done then also maybe mean to you?
Well, for me, I mean, Procter is really a company where they have the consumer in their DNAs. I mean, I was working in marketing. You would talk about consumer goods products, which are really not so greatly differentiated via technology. I mean, a detergent is a detergent, and a household cleaner is a household cleaner. And but they have the consumer in their DNA because they want to differentiate, and they manage this via creating a concept around it, an advertising concept around a technology. And to get this concept really working, you really have to go deep into the consumer. And there was a term that we used at P&G, which was called the consumer insight. And the consumer insight, today an insight is used in a totally different meaning, but the consumer insight was really the core of our work. What is it? And it came from the advertising industry. What is a consumer insight? It is kind of a believed problem that the consumer has. A problem he believes, either with a competitive product, like I clean my laundry and with my normal detergent, the carrot stains don't go out. That's a believed problem, no? Or when and so this consumer insight was so central, but how to find it? How to find it? And a little anecdote, when I started my job, I was little assistant on household cleaner, and my boss at the time told me the first 3 weeks, you have to go in-home visits. You have to do in-home visits. Talk to consumers. I said, okay, I go talk to the consumers. I set everything up, and then a day before I asked him, what should I ask them? What should I do? And he told me, just ask them what they do and what they try to get done and how they do it. So basically it was jobs to be done. And a household cleaner is not about, of course it's about cleaning a surface, for example, but it's also about spending less time, having more time with the family. And then of course the advertising makes a story around having time with the family, spending a Saturday afternoon with the kids, things like this. That's the consumer insight. And that was found via a technique which today we call jobs to be done.
I really like how you especially point out that customer insight at some point in time was really a rather specified, clear concept. I mean, now I think if you Google it, there is 1,000 things can be an insight, but if you really have a precise idea of what you're looking for, and I really liked also, I don't know who your boss was, but that he didn't say you use that technique or use this set of question, but kind of just told you, he told you what you should go look for, what should you go out and look for, and that can really, really be helpful, I think.
Yes.
So was this at P&G mostly on this household and detergents things, or did you have other projects?
Yeah, I was working on detergents. I was working on household cleaner. I was working on paper products. That was Pampers, for example. Pampers, very interesting, very, very emotional product with a double benefit parents who want to get a job done, benefits baby who also wants to have a job done.
It's a little bit hard to interview probably, but
I worked on toilet paper.
Oh, nice.
I don't tell this story now.
I think I haven't heard this story.
It's a bit embarrassing.
Was there some observational research with the toilet paper?
Yeah.
Watching it
in-home visits.
I'm afraid to ask.
Focus groups on toilet paper. I remember like yesterday. And then you ask, how do you get the job done? How do you do it?
Yeah.
And if you have a focus group, let's say of 12 people in there, then you suddenly realize 3 different ways of people doing, and never, and I would bet that you will have different, if you would do the same in these 4 groups. Anyway, very interesting.
But so maybe go back to this P&G moment where you said you use jobs without the label. I mean, but maybe you can, or maybe we can go a little bit more into this. How did you? So you said you were looking for 2 things, if I understand this correctly. What do they do, and what are the problems they faced, or was it more? What is jobs to be done than to you?
Yeah, it was about the first step. What do you do? How do you do it? What, in a sense, what do you want to achieve? What goal do you want to achieve? And then how do you do it? But then the most important one is, where does it fail when you do it? So on Pampers, kind of the obvious failure is leaking. If a diaper leaks, that's that can be very dramatic. And this was a known insight. A diaper has, even if it leaks 0.5% of the time, and you calculate over a period of 6 months, you can calculate how often you have a problem, and the likelihood that the parent is in the supermarket at the time at the cashier and it leaks then, that is really a dramatic failure. So we looked for failures in competitive products. We looked for failures in not solved, let's say things that are not solved simply. We looked at failures in terms of that it is time consuming. And we looked for failures that are like not systematic. So like if the quality of the performance is like variating. Sometimes it's clean, sometimes it's not clean. Sometimes it leaks, sometimes it doesn't leak. So this is like this quality, if you can call it quality, but the steadiness of the performance. And we looked really deep. Because in consumer goods, I mean, everything has been done. So where are these little failures which you can then over dramatize, which then build the brands? So that's really the difference between, in my view, consumer goods and when you go into technology or into medtech, where we have examples. In medtech, the failures are much more obvious and greater than in consumer goods. There you really have to search, and we see this fully reflected in our CFI projects. I mean, we do projects for consumer goods, we do projects for medtech, for financial services, insurances, even B2B. And we see that whenever we do something in consumer goods, it is really hard to find these failures, these pain points. Well, it is our failures. Actually, the word failure is not a good word in this context, because a failure means already a product failure, and jobs to be done should be solution free. So it's not a product failure. It's really a problem or pain point that a user has when using a solution, a product, for example. So that's
that's right. I mean, then it can translate into fixing a product, or the problem is caused by a faulty product, but the problem should be independent of the solution as such.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to ask, so regarding the three, is it correct? So there were three different things you were looking at P&G. It was, or three different cases. One was, correct me if I'm wrong. So basically some failures in, for example, leakage in the Pampers. Then you had not solved, and then you had varying results, so variance, some kind of variance in the results.
And time.
Oh, time. So what is time exactly? If it takes too long?
Is when the consumer says it takes too long, or it is also complicated. Is very often linked to time.
Effort is the same.
Effort takes too much effort to do it. Time can be length of time, so that it takes months to do it, or it can be that the amount of time I spent on something is too long.
Okay, that's very interesting. I find. So, and could you maybe expand on the difference between so a failure, I think you called it, and a not solved? What would be, what's the difference between those two? So,
well, not solved is, for example, now it is solved, but it.
So if we take the Pampers example, we have. So if there's a leakage, it would be you mentioned 0.5% leakage in a certain time frame. That would be a failure, I would imagine. But at what point does it become a not solved then? If it's 50,
not solved, real problems like there was this like transferring electricity without a cable. Okay, that's a solution, but having basically cable-free devices, which 20 years ago did not exist so much. Everything had a cable, and you had a lot of cables. So this was kind of not solved. How can you solve this? And the problem then was like, I have the cable here around. So this could be an example, or in beauty, basically stopping the aging process. This is not solved. Many people are working on it, but it's still not solved. But there are solutions coming to solve this. It might take another 100 years to stop the aging process, but this is a not solved problem.
I'd like them to solve that one a little faster.
Yeah.
I think that depends on we're a nice demographically split, so probably that.
Or very often, if you have if you are too customer centric, for example, having something at no price for free, it's also something. Sometimes it cannot be solved because there is a business model behind it.
Oh yeah, I really like this emphasis, and I think that is one thing over the time that I now know you, is really something that you have been always championing in a sense. So this, and I think you mentioned this in the very beginning. So really, let's say red ocean kind of style markets. I mean, really the competitive difference between the product is so small. And then it's precisely the customer and the customer insight that can help you out of this mess, or I mean, it's just constantly working on this customer insight. And I think that is something, we can call it jobs to be on, but whatever, but that is something, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that is something I believe is something like your core philosophy, at least, that really the power of this customer insights that can really help you in 1,000 different ways. If
I think it's really, the answer is with the customer or the user. The user can tell you how to differentiate a product, how to add value to a product. I think in strategy, when we think about strategy framework, when I was going to university, everything was about competitive advantage. So everyone was benchmarking against competition. So people were looking for advantages versus competitors. Fine. This has changed, totally changed. Today, people, and you need to look at the user, at the consumer, as the customer, at any stakeholder to get the answer how to improve your product. Because companies have realized that if they just benchmark to competition, they are as good as competition. And that's not good enough today. That leads to lower pricing, that leads to probably decline in market share, lower profitability. That's not really the growth that companies want to have behind their business.
Yeah. So
I think that really it is find the answer with the user and the consumer.
So back with P&G, so they sent you to interview customers, and it sounds like the training you had was fairly informal, just from your boss. But was there some formal training, or was it, or pretty much it was? It almost sounds like it was a pretty quick conversation, as far as what your preparation.
No, there was formal training.
There was formal training. Okay.
There was formal training, for example, how to do advertising, how to do market research, how to communicate. There was a lot of formal training. Most of it, however, was on the job. And as I said at the beginning, it was so much in the DNA of the people. You learn from them. And this is really, there was no formal training. There was formal training, but it was really about embracing this culture that was there. Today, I don't know, but at least at the time.
Did you know me Ambassador while you were there?
No.
Oh, okay.
Where was she?
Me Ambassador's a he. Developed an innovation process. Came out of P&G. Was heavily involved with the Coast soap. Was one of his projects. But that was probably before you were there. Went on to come up with his own innovation method, and I've just borrowed a lot from him. I was just wondering if you knew him during your time there. But actually, the more I think about it, he was probably gone before you were there.
Well, I was in marketing. But what is interesting to mention in this context is that the R&D department had the same philosophy. So the R&D department was not, of course, they were called technical center. But if you looked at the number of women with babies waiting outside the technical center to do consumer testing and user testing, be surprised. If you go to the Gillette Technical Center in London, you'd be surprised how many men are going in there and shave. So this was not just marketing. This was really everywhere in the organization, and especially in the product development department.
Right.
This is something that you kind of picked up in P&G, and it's so ingrained. There's a part of which of what Brandbridge does, which has to do with CFI, and we will get to this, but there's other things that you do also in your work with startups, and I really believe that this focus on the customer in whatever way you can. I mean, it's not by chance probably called customer focused innovation. Is really, I believe, the core also of what I've learned from you. Maybe we can. I mean, that was kind of P&G this first few years, and I mean, using jobs to be done without the label. I believe that there's probably a couple of people out there that had maybe made the same experience, that they did something like jobs to be done without the label. And then at some point the label came in. So at some point you got in touch. So it was with Roger, and I, so full disclosure, I worked with Roger. So that's why I met Beat. where you got into touch a little bit more with the label. Can you talk a little bit at that phase? So how did it then evolve? Because
I mean, Roger was working with Tony Alvik already since 5 years. So he was in Europe. He read the first Harvard Business Review article of Tony in 2000, I think it was. Roger contacted him and basically brought him the Bosch project. Bosch is a German company. Roger was doing all different kinds of consulting work, but was fascinated by the ODI methodology and his article. And he went to Tony and asked him, look, I have a project here. Your methodology seems to fit. Let's do it together. And then Tony came here and they kind of figured out at the time, it was less a defined process. It was more a concept. And then they did the Bosch project in Europe. And then Roger flew over because there was a US project, which you see in the cases now, the circular saw case. And they did this. And I met Roger, that was must be between 2000 and 2005. And I met Roger again in 2005. And then we created, we worked with Tony in Europe. We did strategy in Europe. And we worked with the methodology, which was becoming much more stable and much more formalized. And so we worked between 2005 to 2009 with the ODI strategy, and had quite some very interesting international projects. We were much more international than the US group. I mean, we had projects from for Cochlea, for example, in Australia, for Alstom, industrial company in energy in France. Some Swiss financial services companies where we had pan-European or even that was all in this time. There was also Syngenta, which was a global project where we went from China to India to Brazil. So these were all projects done somehow with the ODI methodology. But we tweaked it. Let's put it like this. We tweaked it. We had ideas to improve it. We had ideas to make it more flexible. And at one point in time, we wanted to get independent again from the ODI process, because the ODI process was getting a bit too strict for us. We saw differences, cultural differences, which were maybe not so good reflected. I don't want to talk absolutely not negative about ODI. ODI is fantastic, and it is also the basis and the basic system. I must say there are also elements in there which I knew from Procter, like this systematic, qualitative, quantitative in one go. This is what we did in Procter. There was always qualitative, quantitative. All this. I mean, it was very clear that without a quantitative module step, you cannot base decision on qualitative. Simply, this is not reflecting the reality. So, but then we started to improve, and in good terms, we separated from ODI in 2009, I think it was, and created CFI, Customer Focused Innovation, which used the good things and added some elements which we found important at the time.
Can you maybe say a bit more about the cultural differences you noticed? So you mentioned in the theory itself that some of the elements, in your opinion, had a cultural, the cultural differences. So could you maybe expand on that?
So first of all, I have to say that I believe jobs to be done is universal. There is no cultural difference, in my view, on jobs to be done. And I came to this conclusion by really doing projects also on in other countries, in India, for example, with farmers, small farmers, for example. I was China. So, every human being wants to get a job done. A human being gets up in the morning and has like so many minutes a day or a week and always wants to achieve something. Small things, big things, this is almost like human. This is universal. I mean, we humans, we are driven by creating, by changing, by defending against something, by endeavoring somewhere. This is really the human psychology, truly human. So that's why I think jobs to be done is universal. However, in the technique, for example, interview technique, you have to adapt to a Japanese consumer. The Japanese consumer will tell you differently than a US consumer or a French consumer. Mm-hmm. It's a very simple example is the rating scales that you use in quant. If you look at the school system, in France, for example, in France, you have different rating scales and no one ever makes the maximum. So if a French consumer fills out the questionnaire, he or she will never give the maximum. Mm. So you always have to put this relative to each other. And in that sense, we believe that you have to look at the numbers and you cannot just give a strict algorithm and say, if this is the value, it is an unmet need. You have to look at in the market in France relative to all the other French users or consumers, how do they rate? And then you cannot compare this directly to the German consumers because they rate differently. But relative in the French you see pain points, and then relative in the Germans you see pain points, and maybe they are the same. Very often they are the same. And then sometimes they are different, and then you see there are different pain points in France than in German, and need to explain why.
Yeah, I really like this, how somehow almost counterintuitive way, but I really believe it's true in the sense that the jobs to be done language, I think that one is universal. So if you just take a very plain, like, I don't know, I think so prepare a hot beverage in the morning. That's just, it doesn't matter if you're Japanese. I mean, the beverage itself will change, right? So what the solution that you actually use will change, but that you have that job in the morning is quite universal. It doesn't matter if you're French or German or whatever. Probably the likelihood that you have this job is very high. But then exactly when it gets to numbers, I like how you introduced that there are differences. So numbers, one could think these are universal, they're always the same, but it's actually exactly there where things become much more relative and difficult, it seems like.
Yeah. And then the third element is the language. I mean, I know Tony says minimize. Minimize is a very unnatural word in other languages. So
maybe we should just for somebody who isn't that familiar with ODI and qual and quant and what we mean by this. So can we just maybe give a short overview of well, let's take the CFI process because I think a lot of it is similar. So just give a short overview of what this is, and then we go back to, because then probably we'll be more clear on what we mean because language, I think, is a very important point that you raise. So could you maybe just describe what is CFI, what are the steps, and then we'll go back to this language.
Yeah. CFI is...
Oh, hold up, guys. Hold up. Not so fast. Let's save an in-depth conversation about the customer-focused innovation process for the next episode. We've gone deep into the jobs to be done roots of CFI, and that's enough for today. Let me just say this, though. I've been an innovation practitioner for a long time. Let's leave it at that. And I have to say, I really love what Beat and his colleagues have put together. So come see us in the next episode. It's probably just a click away, and see what it's all about. And that does conclude this episode of the Product Quest Podcast. Reach out to us anytime at productquestpodcast@gmail.com. And we'll see you